The PRovoke Podcast, brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Welcome to the PRovoke Media Podcast. I'm Megan Keoghan, Head of Product Development and Production here at PRovoke and host of today's episode sponsored by Havas Red. With us today are Kerry Anderson, UK client partner at Havas Red, and Audrey Arbogast, Associate VP of Havas Red US. In today's episode, we'll dive into influencer marketing trends in Havas Red's newest practice group, Sway. Kerry and Audrey, so good to have you with us.
Thank you for having us.
Very excited to talk about Sway, talk about your roles in both the UK and the US and Havas Red's influencer practice. Audrey, why don't you kick us off with a little intro and about your role, and then Kerry will go to you and then we'll kick it off.
Perfect. So happy to be here and talking about all things influencer. I've been at the agency since 2015. Interestingly, I was hired as a community manager, where essentially my first project was to find influencers posting in and around a coffee client we had at the time, their grand openings. So as soon as they were going to open a new location, my goal was to find influencers posting nearby, looking at their feed, seeing what their aesthetic was, and, going into their DMs and asking them if they wanted a free cup of coffee at our grand opening. So I think, needless to say, influencer marketing looked a lot different back then, 8 years ago. And as this marketing channel has evolved and more brands of all shapes and sizes are wanting a piece of that pie, I've helped grow and hone our agency's offering for both our current and prospective clients. So excited to talk more about what that entails today.
Awesome. Very glad to have you here. Kerry, a little intro from you, perhaps?
Yes. First of all, thank you for having me, Megan, and PRovoke. Exciting. I think it's going to be an exciting session, especially at this time of the year, where we're looking to 2024, so that's exciting. So I have got nearly 15 years of experience, which I think in the world of social media is basically like, I'm really old. I think on that front. So been there through the early days of Instagram. I remember going to my colleague and be like, "What? So people just post pictures and I was like, okay, cool, can get on board with that." Like early campaigns, I remember literally going through like channels and like people's profiles and finding other people they follow and like just spending ages and ages and doing like really manual tasks for like the early days. I would like to think that's a lot more sophisticated now, which is great news for all of us, but I think most recently, there is such a huge demand for influencer marketing, and I think it's really blown up. And I actually think that influencer marketing in itself is like grown into these kind of subgroups and things like that. So it's really blown up, and people have a much better understanding of what it is now than it used to be. And I hope that also means that the perception of influencers are changing, which is great news. So really excited to come forward.
Wonderful. Well, you really set us up quite well there to talk about what we're here to talk about today, which is Havas Red's new practice, Sway, and sort of the rollout of that and the new introduction. So, Audrey, if you would give us just sort of a little background of how this group has started, what the impetus was for it, and what it looks like at Havas Red.
Yeah, I think as the influencer space, we both touched on it, has evolved over time. So have our strategies and processes that we develop to ensure that we're staying on top of those trends. And, as influencer or content creator has become a full-time profession, for many. And, there's full-fledged agencies that represent these creators and platforms to help us find them. Our ways of working have become a bit more modernized and streamlined. And as now a formalized global practice, we have formalized processes, influencer agreements, briefing documents, case studies that we can reference, shared across our global network, that just make us a bit more effective and agile when creating and executing these strategies or these programs on behalf of our clients.
Absolutely. And Kerry, I believe both of you are the sort of influence leads in your region, or in your particular groups. And so I'm interested to hear a little bit about what Sway has looked and felt like and been in the UK, and if you can speak to us a little bit about that in that introduction.
Absolutely. So first of all, I think it's really exciting. I think Sway, even though it didn't have a name, it's kind of been an inception for months for sure. And we've been doing influencer marketing for a long time, but there hasn't been that kind of focus on it. So I think in the UK it's actually a really exciting proposition because there's been so much demand for it, and very naturally I found myself probably doing 80% of influencer marketing now, as opposed to other kind of comms tactics that I used to look after, even things like earned and other kind of channels. So I think that is really exciting. I think from a team perspective as well, there are certain team members who really put their hand up and said, this is what I want to do, this is what I love doing, and they love to rattle off stats or dig into the latest trends. I think that's what's really exciting about influencer marketing. It never stands still. And some of it is a curse, like algorithms changing weekly. It's not necessarily what we love all the time. No Instagram, Meta, everyone else, TikTok. But it definitely keeps things interesting. And you never quite know where the next trend is going to come from, because it is so. I mean, we've got something called Tube Girl in the UK. I'm not sure if that's something that's stuck in other markets. But it literally just changes so quickly, and I think that's what people love about it, and that's why now is a really great time for us to kind of formalize it and put that structure behind it, but also making sure that we really use the village that we have and that network that we have across the globe to formalize it in other markets, because social media is one of those things that absolutely is not in borders. It is very much someone I follow lots of American influencers, I follow Australian influencers, I'm from New Zealand, I follow influencers from back home, so it is really without borders. And I think that's why it's so important to have these leads. And it's actually great that I can call up Audrey and say, listen, this is a challenge that we've got, have you found something similar, have you got experience, have you got a case study that you can kind of talk to, that we can really help our clients achieve their goals?
It sounds like there are some. Oh, go ahead, Kerry. You're going to finish probably, Audrey. Go ahead.
I was just going to build on what Kerry was saying, that, this is really, the demand for these types of programs has just really skyrocketed. And it's brands of all, as I said, all shapes and sizes. So, working with a nonprofit client and, who's looking at partnering with influencers pro bono versus, huge multinational global consumer products brand. Those strategies look a bit different, but yeah, it's everyone wanting a piece of the pie.
Absolutely. Is this, it seems like part of the, the tracking and the measurement and the, the honing of a particular campaign and dialing into the right influencer, it has to have some very tangible business outcomes. And I'm wondering if there are any case studies that you are able to talk about, or kind of examples that either one of you might be able to share about how Sway has really influenced the outcome of a campaign. No pun intended, but
Good use of the
conveniently
word
so.
there. I can certainly talk about some of our brands. I probably can't go into too much detail on the actual statistics. But from my side, we have done a lot in different spaces. So as an example, the National Health Service in the UK, NHS, we work with the blood and transplants team here. And as an example, last year, we worked with quite a few influencers to get messages out around sickle cell donations, and that was a really exciting and fun one, because we got influencers involved with no money, because it is NHS in a way seen as a charity as such, as in they wouldn't pay because it's a kind of service. So it's different to what we would do for other brands. But we got masses of people donating as a result of those specific influencer pieces, and some influencers really, really engaged because it's something that was close to their hearts. So from that point of view, you could see actual donations, and that's something, again, we saw also for NHS Plasma, which is another thing that kind of another project that we work on. And we worked with some of our footballers from over here in the US, soccer for the Americans. So we got a couple of those down to actual plasma donation centers and meeting some fans and putting it on their socials, and it was the highest ever day of donations that they had seen for plasma, which is still very kind of low donation kind of group, because it's not been in the UK for such a long time. So that's certainly a campaign that stood out for me. But then I also work on the Molson Coors portfolio. So that includes brands such as Coors, Madri, which is kind of a Mediterranean lager and super popular here in the UK. And we've done a lot of influencer marketing for those brands, as well as kind of Cobra. And they're all very different and they're all bespoke. So we never would go and take the same strategy or propose the same influencers. Like, they're very distinct. They have their own brand people, brand influencers, tone of voice. So it is hugely important that we are quite distinct with those. And we've seen, huge shifts in actual kind of brand measures. So one of those tasks for Coors, for example, was making one of their partnerships with snowbombing more synonymous with Coors and what they were doing. And they saw a kind of 20% brand uplift in recognition of the association, which was a massive win, because all we did was influencer marketing for that. So we worked with some big names such as Sam Thompson and Pete Wiggs. They're well known here in the UK. And we kind of gave them a challenge, and then we enlisted the help of an Olympic snowboarder called Jamie Nichols, and he taught them how to snowboard, and neither of them had ever snowboarded before. And it was the funniest shoot I've ever been on. It was the most heart-wrenching, because I was like, oh my God, just literally end in tears. But it got millions of views, really strong engagement rates, great view through rates. And I think when you see those stats, then and I think that's what the attraction is from influencer marketing as well. It's like you can actually see specifics where you can, not just in the short term, but even in the long term, like measure some of those things. So as I said, we saw some results in brand uplift studies where we had only done influencer marketing. So there was much more, and some of that was also paid for, absolutely, which actually now comes part of what we do a lot. Like, it's not a organic only, like there are organic parts to it, but there's also a lot of paid that comes into it. But yeah, so I think some really great results there. I don't want to talk too much about the UK. So Audrey, I'm not sure if you have other ones that you'd like to speak to.
Yeah, well, I think tangible business impact looks different for every business. For some, it's just that awareness, education piece, consideration. And then for others, it really is the conversion and looking at, click-throughs and those sorts of metrics. But one that comes to mind is a first ever influencer campaign that we designed for a healthcare benefits platform or manager. And really, with it being their foray into influencer marketing, we designed a campaign that was really around awareness and engagement around HSAs, specifically healthcare savings accounts, if I'm remembering correctly. And, in creating that strategy, leveraging both a macro influencer as well as a roster of micro influencers, because that macro influencer was really going to get us that reach and, a high number of impressions, whereas the micro influencers were brought in to boost that engagement. And what we saw was, not only were the engagements quantitatively on target for what we were aiming for, but the quality was really high as well. So questions being asked about healthcare benefits, HSA day, open enrollment. So really engaged followers, which again also underscored to our client that, we had found the right partners to engage with and had kind of brought them in at these key moments during the year. So I think, success looks different for every one of our clients. And part of those initial conversations we have with them is, defining success so that we can help tailor our program around that.
So certainly with like tailoring the program, once you've decided that influencers work well, but as we talk about these business outcomes, it could almost seem like influencer is right for every campaign. And I know that is probably not quite the case, but certainly for the majority these days, what are some of the factors that you sort of look for when deciding whether bringing Sway into the programming mix for a client is the right kind of consideration?
I think it very much depends on their business and brand and marketing objectives. So I always go back to the basics on that one. I want to understand what the business objective is. Then I want to understand how that brand and marketing objective feeds into that business objective, and then how what Sway does can fit into that marketing or brand objective. And I think that's really, really important. And then I actually distinguish between influencers and what role they play. So I beyond nano, micro, macro, mega, mid, all the different tiers of influencers. I also look at the type of influencer to put forward. So you've got your big talent, right? So you'd have like your Adeles, Ed Sheerans, I don't know, like tons of like actors, actresses, and so on, who use social media, but very much here's a picture, and like lots of people love it because they love that talent. So like Adele will just put up, or like Beyonce, she would literally put up 10 pictures all in a row of like a recent performance, and people love it because people love Beyonce. And then that makes sense. But she's got a different appeal, not to mention the cost of getting her to do anything would be quite an undertaking for most brands. So that wouldn't ever be kind of a one-off or anything. It would be long-term partnerships. But you then also have your influencers who I think, I should also say, your kind of talent, I think they're great as a mix for earned as well. So you kind of couple that appeal, and I think that is really, really important. Whereas influencers that are more traditional influencers, they're really great at bringing across specific messages that are difficult in other mediums. So where you're launching a new product, for example, that's not always of interest to traditional media from an earned perspective. Like it's quite hard to get a journalist excited about, you know, the latest, I don't know, the latest design of a, you know, of a product or thing, like, even if you think like as the marketing, like, oh, it's amazing, consumers don't care most of the time. So influencers can be really helpful in getting some of those messages across that are a little bit more brand heavy than what you would ever get away if you had to get a third party to endorse you. And then I think you've got content creators. So content creators to me are ones where you give them a message or two you want to land, and you give them what you're looking to achieve. Then you hand it over and you say, right, controls out now. Like, you know, here are your guidelines. Like, here are the rules that we have to abide to if you work in a regulated industry. Like, here are specific messages we have to be very careful. Like, you can't say X or Y because you would go against advertising guidelines. But then you hand it over because you trust that what they do is what you bought into. So you're not being as prescriptive because you know that they know their followers and they know what works for them. So you get hugely creative pieces of content back. But there is trust, a lot of trust that is involved here from a brand perspective. So I think that's almost like what I then look at to also determine what is right, going back to those kind of brand objectives and things like that. And sometimes I will actually say, look, I know that you want to work with content creators because it's exciting, it's fun, and you've seen it work for other brands. However, dipping your toe in that way is probably not the best thing to do unless you've got quite a brave marketing team, or you've got, you know, probably not so much blue chip. Like, if you're a startup, it's a little bit easier. If you're a smaller business, it's easier. But if you're spending a lot of money on someone and you don't necessarily know what they're going to come back with, that's a leap of faith. And yeah, I think that's almost then how I make decisions on
Sure.
who you would then recommend.
It sounds like one of Sway's strengths is helping a brand determine or define which influencers might be a good fit, whether or not they're a good fit, all of that. What are some of the other tactics that you are able to leverage in a campaign, whether that's like sourcing the correct influencers or finding them out in the wild, to like measurement, reporting, all of that I understand is like a part of the Sway ecosystem.
Yeah.
Is that, can you speak to any of those kind of offerings or things? Audrey, if you want to take this one.
Yeah,
I think it's you know, end-to-end meeting with the client, discussing the campaign, figuring out, to Kerry's point, how does it fit within the larger integrated comms strategy? So, you know, what are we doing on the earn side? What are we doing on the social side? Influencer, to me, kind of straddles between those two worlds. And, you know, making sure that it all ladders up to the overarching objective. You know, then going into, you know, the creation of the strategy, the selection of the influencers, the vetting of the influencers, you know, negotiations and contracting, which we always like to give ourselves a buffer for, because you just never know how long that phase will take. And then, you know, going into the feedback and approvals process with the clients, you know, getting that content, giving it a first level of review on behalf of our clients, and making sure that it does align with the brief, and you know, there aren't any blatant errors or messaging little hiccups. And then, of course, sending it to our clients, and some of our clients, you know, then need to send it to their legal teams or other stakeholders. And then ideally, everything gets approved and it all goes live. And I should have mentioned prior to this, making sure we have a system in place to capture that content and report on it. So, you know, fortunately, we have a couple tools that we take advantage of to, you know, leverage or to help us measure the performance on the individual's posts, and then, you know, what the campaign is looking like overall. And then, you know, the campaign comes to a close. We put together a report. We think about some key takeaways and insights for the next time we do it. And yeah, I think, you know, it's obviously there are nuances for the different brands that we're working with and the spaces that they operate in and the type of campaign that we're doing. But yeah, I think over time we've really honed that process from, you know, the very start to the reporting and recap.
Kerry, you had brought up an idea a little bit ago about like the amount of trust and kind of that leap of faith that is required of a brand. And that I'm curious if we can, you know, we've kind of really covered the tactical side of this, right? But getting into this space where Havas Red is very committed to storytelling and people-led narratives. And how do you work with a brand? You kind of touched on it, when that message or that storytelling lands better when it's organic and when it's not micromanaged. And what sort of levers do you use to keep things brand safe, but also, you know, relinquish that trust to an influencer?
Yeah, absolutely. We, first of all, it's knowledge of our client partners. I think it's like knowing what things make them nervous, and, you know, where there's room for trial and error and where there's not, and how important, you know, campaigns are. I think what I like to adopt from kind of product marketing, product testing, is like the A/B testing as much as possible, like seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. And from an influencer perspective, it is difficult because the context is always different. So you can't just test like 5 different ads at the same time. Like that's not how it works in influencer marketing. But you can try different things, and that's why I'm quite in favor of long-term partnerships with influencers where there is a strong brand fit. And I think hopefully most of us have now moved away from using talent for talent sake, which used to be a theme. It's like, oh, just stick talent on it. Absolutely not. Like, because these ones are now valuable, very valuable, hopefully long-term partnerships. And I think when you go into the long-term partnerships, that's where you can really look at, like in terms of mindset, you can really look at, right, brand fit, audience fit, you know, like tone of voice, like, you know, is it something that the legal team will be okay with, things like that. Where I work in a lot of like regulated industries, gotta love it. So I'm also very mindful of like talking influencers through those regulations, because some of those aren't straightforward and some of those are a feeling or a gut feel, as opposed to here's the you know, black line and you can't step like over it. So those are all little things that you consider. And then what I do is I work through the guardrails for the clients and give them, like in the briefing process, give them as much control there to really show what they are looking for. And then what we do with influencers is actually ask them for concepts. So we usually say, right, can you give us some concepts? And they come with 2 or 3. So there is still a level of control in there, but it is not scripted where we can help it. So that's the thing that lands really well. And I think there are quite a few influencers, like you know, Jeremy Lynch is another one, who's, you know, becoming quite big. You've got like Julius Dane, like you've got quite a few that almost make a few of those like brand partners their own thing. So they get really great at taking certain things and turning into something that's hugely relevant to people's lives. And like, it's like the meme moment, I call it. It's like, oh my God, yes, like that's me. Like, you know, you kind of want a lot of that, and brands aren't very good at that. But then it's almost going back and saying to the brand partners, you really like this because you like this influencer, because you know that they work. And I think people get braver over time when they've seen results that speak for themselves. So, and that's what you can go back to. And then the other thing that I always like to do is we always ask for benchmarks of like other campaigns that people have seen that they really like. And then we go and dig a bit deeper and explain what's happened then, what the process is. And sometimes we get the insight from the agents that we work with because we have great relationships with them as well. And sometimes it's just knowledge of like how it works, of like, you know, they wouldn't have had this whole scripted and signed off by legal. Like that's just not how they would have done it. So I think that kind of reassures them. And then the more experience you have, the more I think comforted clients feel when you put them into those situations. But as I said, like it is understanding your client, it's knowing when to push and when to back off. And it's also understanding the importance of their campaign. Like if you've only got 10 days to get it right, then probably don't want to like relinquish control entirely because the stakes are too high. But then there are other moments where you can really win and you can test and trial. And then to Audrey's point of like, you know, insights and learnings for next time. So like we do like for us, it's not let's just do the report and send it over and like be done with it. It really is, okay, like this is this very specific thing. Should we do you know, collab posts next time? Like, you know, do we think that impacted rate, engagement rate? Like, you know, what was it the time of day? Like, do we think that it wasn't the same, like the right frame for them to be into and get it live? So yeah, so I think hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, no, absolutely. I want to shift just a slight bit from specifically to influencers, but speaking about people-led storytelling, the shift from storytelling to fact-telling, influencers feel like the ultimate kind of case study for people-led storytelling and shifting that. And what are some of the other ways that you are starting to see this people-led storytelling kind of come to life? Whether that's kind of the amplification around an influencer campaign, or if that's a completely different tactic that you're building in. Is that something that either of you can speak to?
Yeah, I think this is something we see resonating across all marketing channels. On social media, for example, I just think of the crazy adoption of TikTok and how that has really taken off. And, you know, brands can publish those polished pieces of content to that platform, but we know that, you know, what really does best and what TikTok was designed to do is share content from real people doing real things, you know, including silly dances and hair tutorials and cooking videos and all the other things, you know, you find in your TikTok feed. And on Instagram, of course, it's following a similar trend. I think, you know, that platform has really incentivized people to start publishing reels. And, you know, those reels don't necessarily need to be people-led storytelling. But again, we know that those long form video pieces of content do really well. So I think, you know, people crave the human connection and, you know, that buzzword that we keep hearing about, authenticity, and, you know, they are seeking that out on all different kinds of channels. So, you know, really being intentional with the storylines that we're encouraging influencers to post about is just more important than ever.
Yeah. I think to Audrey's point as well, in terms of that, like authenticity or just realness, like moving away from this really polished, which I think is like an evolution of like the kind of Photoshop nature of like celebrity magazines and things like that. It's like people just want the real. And that's why I think like blooper or behind the scenes content does so well as well, because it's like you see what actually goes into making these videos, and that's just quite quite fun. I enjoy watching it myself, because you see the finished product, but you kind of know that the journey of it was the fun bit, like what happened to get to that point was a really like exciting thing. And I think what we've also seen is, going back to that people side of things, like I used to work for one of the big British supermarkets, Tesco, and they actually, because they have got so many stores, there are so many colleagues within those stores that are starting to have their own social media fan pages, because they're known as like the tannoy guy, like the one who's always like saying funny things on the tannoy. And I think those ones are almost like gold dust, because it shows to a brand that a brand is made up of people as well. So like your company is like, you are who, and over here in the UK is quite nice, like Waitrose, for example, they call their employees partners. And I think it's that kind of, you're part of this, and that's the kind of people, like moving on from that UGC, even having things be less controlled by your marketing teams in that sense, and having other people come to the forefront.
Absolutely. Sorry, I was muted myself there. Yeah, it's really an interesting place to be thinking about the evolution of where influencers marketing started to where it has become, and how the unfiltered became the thing that was so kind of jarring or concerning in the beginning. And we've actually moved to this space where it's the gold dust, as you say, or it's like the goal. And it's an exciting time to be sort of moving to this place where influencers can truly influence. Do you see or find success in bringing influencers sort of from behind the screen to in real life? Like, I know you had mentioned, I'm trying to think, was it the football players, soccer players who like went to the plasma donation centers? Do you find effectiveness with that? Is that sort of a one-off thing? Speak a little bit about that. That'd be great.
I think there is, again, I think it depends on, who they are as well, because like I don't know what's happened. I think I'm like, the light's gone. Well, I think hopefully,
You're good. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now I've obviously lost my train of thought.
In person.
Yes, absolutely. But I think it depends on the influencer, because some influencers, ironically enough, are introverts as well. And so it depends on the situations that you put them into, I would say, just like any other talent. So some people love it, and then that's great. And I think where they've got kind of fans, followers, they would really appreciate meeting them. So when we were filming in the Alps for a lot of our content, like, we work with some talent, like we literally had people coming up, oh my God, you were like my hero. And like, that's what they were going for. So yeah, like 100% as long as it's right.
Mm-hmm. Anything for you, Audrey? I see you have a thought brewing.
It's percolating. Yeah, I think it's gold dust, or striking the right balance between ensuring our clients' goals are being met while also giving creator partners the power to do what they do and create content that they feel will resonate best with their audience. I think Kerry said this, that we're looking to them to be the experts on what's going to resonate best with their followers. And for brands, I think that does mean letting go a little bit. And I think, as Kerry mentioned, the results will speak for themselves. I think one of the ways that we try and strike that balance is in that briefing process, including prompts, that then the creator has the freedom to take that prompt and do what they feel is best with it. So one of the campaigns we're currently working on is a consumer product that won typically would use when they're sick. So our prompt is for parent influencers to share about personal experiences or memories of maybe their grandma used to use this product with them when they were kids and they were sick. And now as parents, how are they using it with their kids? And I think that sense of realness and tapping into that personal story, that's going to be what generates genuine excitement and, is more of an authentic endorsement of the product that then will ideally translate into solid results.
Absolutely. Those meaningful connections that we are all seeking in 2024. So you gave us a wonderful place to sort of start to tie up, though we could talk about influencer stories and campaign stories all day long and exchange them, I'm sure. It is really an exciting time to think about just this evolution to leveraging real people to tell real stories, and in finding, safe ways to incorporate them into brand stories is really a cool horizon to be on. So parting thoughts from either one of you before we sign off. I don't know. Kerry?
Difficult one. I think for any brands wanting to dip their toe into influencer marketing, it's stay true to your brand, and focus on what you're looking to deliver and what is going to help deliver that. So an example is Threads launched and everyone's like, oh my God, I've got to be on Threads. It's like, hang on, breathe. Is it right for your audience? Is it where you need to be? And focus on doing 1-2 channels where your audience is really prevalent, then trying to be everywhere that's the latest trend, because social media is built on trends and it is always changing and you can always chase the next one. Just focus on what's right, and experts should advise you on the right channels, the right influencers, and if it is indeed the right strategy. So that's mine.
Authenticity, being authentic to yourself and choosing the authentic channels to that brand. Audrey, anything else from you before we sign off?
That is perfect from Kerry. I think too, consumers are smart. They can sniff out when they're being sold something. I know when I'm scrolling through my Instagram, I can certainly tell. I usually like or engage if it's an influencer. I want to make sure that, they're getting that engagement for their brand partnership. But I think, the more real you can allow an influencer to be, while also remaining true, as Kerry said, to what the brand objectives are and ensuring that that messaging is aligned on and, those parameters and guardrails are up. I think that's really where we see influencer marketing be so successful. As marketers and brands, we need to remember that consumers follow influencers for their recommendations and trust their opinions. And so, we really need to tap into that. And that's where we really start to see the results.
Well, thank you both for being here. Thank you to Havas Red for sponsoring today's episode. Lots more information on Sway on their website. Kerry, Audrey, it has been lovely, and I look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking about influence marketing.
Yes, thank you, Megan, and thank you, PRovoke. This has been fun.
You've been listening to the PRovoke podcast, brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.